Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The summer after sophomore year was supposed to be when everything changed for me. I'd been saving up money from my job at the grocery store for months, dreaming about making movies with my friends. We had all these ideas: zombie comedies, fake documentaries about our town's weird history, that kind of stuff. So when I saw that old Sony camcorder sitting on a folding table at a yard sale on Maple Street, marked down to $30, I knew I had to grab it. The guy selling it was probably in his 60s, wearing a faded baseball cap, and barely looked up from his newspaper when I handed him the cash. He just mumbled something about clearing out his brother's stuff and waved me off when I asked if it still worked properly. I remember rushing home on my bike with the camcorder stuffed in my backpack, already texting my friends about our first shoot that weekend. The thing was heavier than I expected, one of those early 2000s models with the flip-out screen and everything. When I got to my room and plugged it in, I was pumped to see it still powered on. The battery was shot, but it worked fine connected to the wall. I started messing around with the buttons, figuring out the zoom and focus, when I noticed there was still a memory card inside. My first thought was to format it. I mean, who wants some stranger's old files? But curiosity got the better of me. I connected it to my laptop, thinking maybe there'd be some cool footage I could use for editing practice or something. The memory card had dozens of video files, all with those generic naming conventions like vid 043 and stuff like that. The first few I clicked on were exactly what you'd expect. Some kid's birthday party with a Transformers cake, a badly filmed school play where you could barely hear the dialogue, Christmas morning with wrapping paper everywhere, normal family stuff from maybe 5 or 6 years ago, judging by the clothes and phones people were using. I was about to give up and format the card when I noticed the timestamps on some of the later files. They jumped around weirdly, like someone had been messing with the camera's date settings. One video from supposedly 3 in the morning caught my eye because the thumbnail was almost completely black. At first, I thought the file was corrupted. The screen stayed dark for about 20 seconds, just the sound of someone breathing behind the camera. Then a light flicked on, one of those bare bulbs hanging from a ceiling, and I could see what looked like a basement or cellar. Concrete walls with water stains, some metal shelving units against one wall, boxes stacked in corners. The camera was shaky, like whoever was filming was walking down wooden stairs. That's when I saw it. In the corner, barely visible in the swinging light, there was someone sitting on the floor. Their arms were pulled behind them, and even with the grainy quality, I could tell they were tied to a pipe running along the wall. My heart started pounding as the camera moved closer. The person had their head down, hair hanging over their face. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman. They were wearing what looked like a dirty white t-shirt and jeans. The camera operator never spoke, just filmed in silence for another 30 seconds or so, occasionally adjusting the zoom. Then the person on the floor moved just slightly, lifting their head enough that I could see duct tape across their mouth. The video cut off abruptly after that, like someone had hit the stop button in a hurry. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, trying to process what I'd just watched. Part of me wanted to believe it was fake, some student film project or Halloween prank. But something about the way it was filmed felt too real, too casual, like whoever was behind the camera had done this before. I went through the rest of the files after that, looking for anything else suspicious. Most were more family videos, but I found 2 other clips from that same basement. One showed the same person from a different angle, and in this one, you could see plastic sheeting on the floor beneath them. The other was shorter, maybe 10 seconds, but it showed someone else, a younger guy with a beard, also tied up in a different corner. The timestamp said it was recorded 3 days after the first video. My mind was racing. Should I call the police? Post it online? I didn't even know where these videos were taken or who these people were. All I had was an address from the yard sale receipt the old man had given me. 447 Birchwood Lane. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about those videos. I barely slept, kept seeing that person tied up every time I closed my eyes. Around noon, I decided to drive by the address from the receipt. Birchwood Lane was on the older side of town, where all the houses were built in the 50s and had those detached garages. When I found 447, my heart sank. The place was obviously abandoned. Overgrown lawn, newspapers piled on the porch, plywood over some of the windows. There was a faded real estate sign in the yard, but it was so weathered I couldn't read the phone number. I sat in my car for a while, debating whether to get out and look around. The whole street felt deserted, like everyone had moved away years ago. Finally, I worked up the nerve to walk up the driveway. The garage door was partially open, and I could see it was empty inside except for some old paint cans and a broken lawnmower. That's when I made what was probably a stupid decision. Instead of going to the police right away, I uploaded one of the basement videos to a forum I used for filmmaking stuff. I blurred out the faces and kept the title vague. Found this on an old camera. Anyone recognize the location? I figured maybe someone would know something, or tell me it was from a movie or whatever. Within an hour, the post had over 100 comments. Most people thought it was fake, but a few seemed genuinely disturbed. One user said the basement looked familiar, that the water stains on the wall had a distinctive pattern. Then around midnight, I got a private message from an account with no post history. All it said was, "Delete it before they find you." I thought it was just some troll trying to freak me out, but then they sent another message with a screenshot of my profile, highlighting personal details I'd shared in old posts. The town I lived in, mentions of my high school, even a photo I'd posted of my house from the outside when I was showing off Christmas decorations. I deleted the video from the forum immediately, but it was too late. People had already downloaded it, shared it on other sites. My inbox was flooding with messages, some offering help, others accusing me of making the whole thing up for attention. But what really got to me was when I looked out my bedroom window that night. There was a van parked across the street that I'd never seen before. It was one of those white utility vans with no windows in the back, just sitting there with the engine off. I watched it for maybe an hour, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Then I saw a small orange glow inside, someone lighting a cigarette. They were just sitting there in the dark, facing my house. I grabbed my phone to take a picture, but as soon as I lifted it to the window, the van's engine started, and it drove away slowly, no headlights until it reached the corner. The next few days were hell. The van came back, always parking in slightly different spots, but always with a clear view of my house. Sometimes it was there when I woke up, sometimes it would show up after school. I tried to get the license plate once, but it was covered in mud or something. I told my parents someone was creeping me out, but without the full story, they just said to ignore it. How could I explain that I'd found what looked like kidnapping videos and posted them online? I started taking different routes home, checking mirrors constantly, jumping every time my phone buzzed. Then things got worse. I came home from work one evening to find my bedroom window open. I always kept it locked. Nothing was missing, but my laptop was open on my desk, and the folder where I'd saved the video files was empty. Even the memory card, which I'd hidden in my sock drawer, was gone. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and told my parents I was staying at my friend Jake's house for a few days, said we were working on a summer project. Instead, I drove to the police station and told them everything. The officer who took my report seemed skeptical at first, especially when I couldn't produce the actual videos. But when I mentioned the address on Birchwood Lane, something in his expression changed. He made a phone call, spoke in low tones, then came back and asked me to wait. About an hour later, 2 detectives showed up. They told me that house had been connected to several missing persons cases from years ago, but they'd never found enough evidence. The property had changed hands multiple times through shell companies, making it impossible to track the real owners. They took my statement, the camcorder, everything I had. One detective gave me his card and said they'd have a patrol car check on my house regularly. I never saw the van again after that. The police investigation led to some arrests a few months later. Apparently, the videos helped them connect the dots on a trafficking ring that had been operating across several states. They never told me much about it, just that my discovery had been significant. I still think about the old man at the yard sale sometimes. Was he involved? Did he know what was on that camera? The detectives said they couldn't find anyone matching his description connected to that address. I ended up switching schools for senior year, told everyone my dad got a job transfer. Even now in college, I can't shake the feeling that someone's watching whenever I'm alone. I never made those movies with my friends. Actually sold all my video equipment and switched my major to accounting. Some stories aren't meant to be filmed, and some things, once you've seen them, you can't unsee. I used to work as a nurse at Presbyterian Hospital in Denver before switching to IT support 5 years ago. The burnout had gotten to me, 12-hour shifts, watching people die, going home to an empty apartment. Meeting Melissa changed everything. She was this vibrant art teacher with curly auburn hair who collected vintage furniture and painted landscapes on weekends. We got married in 2018, bought a small house near Washington Park, and I thought we'd finally found our rhythm. She'd been through some rough patches before we met: anxiety, depression, a brief hospitalization in her early 20s. But with therapy and medication, she'd been stable for years. That Saturday morning in April, when we stopped at that yard sale, I had no idea how quickly everything would unravel. The old man running the sale lived in one of those 1920s bungalows on Pearl Street, the kind with the original wood siding and overgrown lilac bushes. He must have been in his 80s, wearing a cardigan despite the warm weather, and he barely spoke above a whisper. Most of his stuff was typical yard sale fare: mismatched dishes, outdated electronics, boxes of paperback novels. But Melissa spotted this wine cabinet tucked behind a folding table, partially covered by a tarp. It was beautiful in that haunting way old furniture can be: dark mahogany with intricate carvings of grapevines along the edges, brass hardware tarnished to a deep green. The moment she saw it, her eyes lit up the way they did when she found something special. The old man's face changed when she asked about it, like someone had walked over his grave. He quoted us $30, way too cheap for a piece like that, and when I handed him the cash, his fingers trembled as he counted the bills. We loaded the cabinet into our Subaru, and I remember how heavy it was, much heavier than it looked. The wood felt oddly warm under my hands, like it had been sitting in direct sunlight, even though it had been in the shade. Melissa chatted excitedly about where she'd place it in our dining room, how she'd polish the brass until it gleamed, maybe store her grandmother's crystal inside. But that night she couldn't sleep. I woke up around 2 a.m. to find her side of the bed empty. She was downstairs, standing in front of the cabinet in her nightgown, just staring at it. When I touched her shoulder, she jerked away like I'd burned her. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "The clicking?" I hadn't heard anything, but the way she said it made the hair on my arm stand up. I convinced her to come back to bed, but she kept turning to look at the stairs like something might follow us up. The insomnia got worse over the next few days. By Thursday, she had dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide, and her hands shook when she tried to grade papers. She'd always been a coffee drinker, but now she was going through 2 pots a day, adding sugar with a heavy hand because she said everything tasted bitter. I suggested she call her therapist, maybe adjust her medication, but she snapped at me in a way she never had before. "There's nothing wrong with my brain, Brian," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "The problem is that thing in our dining room." When I offered to move the cabinet to the garage, she became almost hysterical, saying we couldn't move it, that it needed to stay exactly where it was. That's when I started to really worry. Not just about her mental health, but about something I couldn't quite name. Saturday morning, exactly a week after we'd bought the cabinet, I found her in the bathroom with a pair of scissors. She'd cut jagged chunks from her beautiful auburn hair, leaving bald patches on her scalp. Worse, there were thin red lines on her forearms, not deep but deliberate. The The scissors clattered into the sink when she saw me. "I had to get them out," she said, her voice eerily calm. "The thing's crawling under my skin. Can't you see them moving?" My nursing training kicked in. I cleaned and bandaged her arms, all while my mind raced through differential diagnoses: psychotic break, manic episode, severe anxiety manifestation. But when I tried to take her to the ER, she fought me with a strength I didn't know she had. She screamed that the doctors wouldn't understand, that they'd lock her up again, that only the cabinet knew what was really happening. I had to physically restrain her, something I'd never imagined doing to my wife. That afternoon, while Melissa finally slept after I'd given her one of her anxiety medications, I decided to examine the cabinet properly. Maybe there was mold or some toxic wood treatment that was making her sick. The cabinet stood against our dining room wall like it had always been there, its dark wood seeming to absorb the afternoon light. I ran my hands along the carvings, opened each drawer, checked every compartment. In the back panel of the bottom shelf, my fingers found a seam that shouldn't have been there. Using a butter knife, I pried it open and discovered a hidden compartment. Inside were dozens of folded papers, yellowed with age, covered in different handwriting. My chest tightened as I began to read them. They weren't letters or notes in any traditional sense. They were confessions or maybe warnings, written by different people across what looked like decades. The first note was dated 1987, written in shaky cursive. "Helen won't stop scratching at the walls, says there are voices in the wood grain. Doctor thinks it's dementia, but she was fine until we brought this home." Another from 1993. "Third week, can't sleep. Catherine keeps arranging the glasses inside by color, then by size, then breaks them one by one. Never seen her violent before." A typed note from 2001 simply read, "Selling this after Margaret's hospitalization. Whoever buys it, watch for changes after 7 days." My mouth went dry as I counted back. We'd had the cabinet for exactly 7 days. There were more notes, maybe 20 or 30, each documenting someone's deterioration after acquiring the cabinet. Some mentioned psychiatric hospitals, others just stopped mid-sentence. The most recent was from 2018, barely legible. "Tom says I'm imagining things, but I know what I know. The cabinet wants something, feed it or it feeds on you." I heard footsteps upstairs. Melissa was awake. I quickly stuffed the papers into my pocket and closed the compartment, my mind reeling. Part of me, the rational part trained in science and medicine, wanted to dismiss this as coincidence. People with mental illness often fixate on objects, create elaborate delusions around them. But the timeline in these notes, the pattern of escalation after 7 days, the similar symptoms across different people, it was too consistent. When Melissa came downstairs, she looked terrible. Her bandaged arms hung limp at her sides, and she moved like a sleepwalker. She went straight to the cabinet and placed both palms flat against its doors. "It's hungry," she said quietly. "It's been hungry for so long, Brian. The man at the sale he knew. That's why he let it go so cheap. He fed it all he could." I asked her what she meant, what it wanted, but she just shook her head and started humming, this low, tuneless sound that made my skin prickle. That evening, I called her psychiatrist's emergency line. "Doctor." Brennan had treated Melissa for years and knew her history. I explained the rapid deterioration, the self-harm, the delusions about the cabinet. She recommended immediate hospitalization, said she could have a bed ready within the hour. But when I tried to get Melissa to the car, she became combative again. She locked herself in the dining room with the cabinet, and I could hear her talking to it through the door, long, rambling monologues about feeding schedules and offerings. I was about to call 911 when she suddenly went quiet. The silence was worse than her ranting. After 10 minutes, I used a credit card to pop the lock. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by every piece of glassware we owned, methodically breaking each one and arranging the shards in precise patterns around the cabinet's base. "Melissa, honey, you're sick," I said, keeping my voice steady as I stepped over the broken glass. "Let me help you. We'll go see Dr. Brennan, get you feeling better." She looked up at me with eyes that weren't quite hers anymore. The warm brown had gone flat and distant. You read them, didn't you? The notes? When I nodded, she smiled, but it was wrong, like her face had forgotten how to do it properly. Then you know it's not sickness, it's payment. Everyone who's owned it learns eventually. You either feed it properly, or it takes what it needs from you. She held up her bandaged arms. I tried to give it what it wanted, but blood isn't enough, it needs more. The old man, he gave it memories, I think. Pieces of his mind. That's why he could barely speak. She laughed, this brittle sound that made me step back. But I don't have enough memories left to give. I already feel them slipping away. Our wedding day is fuzzy now, and I can't remember my mother's face. I made the decision then. Whatever was happening, psychiatric crisis, toxic exposure, or something I couldn't explain, we needed to get out. I pulled Melissa to her feet, glass crunching under our shoes, and half carried her to the door. She didn't fight me this time, just kept murmuring about forgetting, about empty spaces where thoughts used to be. I got her into the car and drove straight to the ER. While they admitted her, I went back to the house with my brother-in-law, Doug, and we loaded that cabinet onto his truck. He thought I was overreacting, especially when I insisted we take it to the dump that night, but he helped anyway. We threw it into the industrial crusher and watched it splinter into pieces. I half expected something dramatic to happen, a scream, a flash of light, some movie nonsense, but it just cracked and compressed like any other old furniture. Doug patted my shoulder and said stress does weird things to people, that Melissa would be fine with proper treatment. She stayed in the psychiatric ward for 3 weeks. The doctors diagnosed it as a severe dissociative episode triggered by stress, possibly related to her previous mental health struggles. The self-harm, the delusions, the memory issues, all consistent with a psychiatric break. She responded well to antipsychotics and therapy. By the time she came home, she was almost herself again, though she had no clear memory of that week. I never showed her the notes I'd found, just burned them in our backyard fire pit one night. We don't talk about the cabinet. She thinks she had a breakdown, and maybe that's all it was. But sometimes when we drive past a yard sale or an antique shop, she gets this distant look and rubs her arms where the scars have faded to thin white lines. And I notice things too, little gaps in her memory that never quite filled back in, like pieces of her were payment for something I'll never understand. We moved to a new house last year, a modern build with no history, no hidden compartments, no stories trapped in the walls. It helps us both sleep better. The divorce papers had been finalized in early May, and by June I was living alone in the house we'd shared for 8 years. Saturday morning found me wandering through the neighborhood yard sales on Elm Avenue, trying to fill the empty spaces she'd left behind. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just something to make the place feel less like a museum of my failed marriage. That's when I saw her at the Thompsons' driveway sale, examining an old brass lamp with the kind of careful attention most people reserve for fine art. She had this way of tilting her head when she concentrated, auburn hair falling across one shoulder, wearing a sundress covered in tiny yellow flowers that caught the morning light. She must have sensed me watching because she looked up and smiled, not the polite half-smile strangers exchange, but something warmer. "You think this would look good in a living room?" she asked, holding up the lamp. Her voice had a slight rasp to it, like she'd just woken up. I told her it depended on the living room, and we started talking. Her name was Natalie. She'd just moved to the area from Phoenix, and she had this infectious laugh that made you want to keep telling jokes just to hear it again. By the time I'd bought a stack of old records and a vintage mirror, we'd been chatting for nearly an hour about everything from furniture restoration to the best local coffee shops. When I mentioned I was trying to redecorate after my divorce, her eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Oh, I love a good decorating project," she said, practically bouncing on her heels. "I used to help stage houses back in Arizona. Made decent money doing it too." She started giving me tips about color theory and spatial arrangement, gesturing enthusiastically with her hands as she spoke. I found myself telling her about the empty walls where wedding photos used to hang, the bare mantle that once held our collection of travel souvenirs. She listened with this focused intensity, nodding at all the right moments, occasionally touching my arm when she wanted to emphasize a point. Before I knew it, I was inviting her to come see the house and maybe give me some decorating advice. The words tumbled out before I could second-guess myself. Something about her just put me at ease. She checked her phone, bit her lower lip like she was thinking it over, then flashed that warm smile again. "You know what? I'm free this afternoon. Why don't I help you arrange those records and hang that mirror? We can grab lunch first if you want." My chest felt lighter than it had in months. Here was this beautiful, interesting woman who actually wanted to spend time with me, who saw my half-empty house as a project worth tackling, rather than the sad remnant of a failed relationship. We had sandwiches at this little deli on Oak Street, and the conversation never stopped flowing. She told me about her photography hobby, showing me pictures on her phone of desert landscapes and abandoned buildings she'd captured outside Phoenix. When we got to my house around 2 o'clock, she walked through each room like an art curator assessing a gallery. "Oh, this has so much potential," she kept saying, running her fingers along the crown molding, admiring the original hardwood floors. She had me move furniture around, creating what she called conversation spaces and visual flow. The way she directed me was playful but confident, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. The afternoon melted into evening as we worked. She'd found my Bluetooth speaker and connected her phone, filling the house with this eclectic playlist, everything from Motown to indie folk. At one point, while we were hanging the mirror in the hallway, she had to stand on a chair and asked me to steady her by holding her waist. Her perfume smelled like vanilla and something floral I couldn't name. When she climbed down, she stayed close for a moment, looking at our reflection in the newly hung mirror. "See, already looks more like a home," she said softly. We ordered Chinese food and ate it sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by the vinyl records we'd been organizing. She knew so much about music, telling me stories about rare pressings and legendary recording sessions. Around 10 o'clock, she mentioned she'd had a couple glasses of wine with dinner and shouldn't drive. "I can call an Uber," she said, but there was a question in her eyes. I told her she could stay in the guest room if she wanted, trying to sound casual about it even though my pulse quickened. She smiled and said that would be nice, then excused herself to use the bathroom. While she was gone, I quickly straightened up the guest room, putting fresh sheets on the bed. When she came back, she'd washed off her makeup and looked somehow even prettier, more real. We talked for another hour on the couch, and at some point she curled up against my shoulder. I remember thinking this was exactly what I'd been missing, not just the physical closeness, but the easy companionship. I woke up around 3 in the morning with a dry throat, probably from the wine. The house was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. I padded to the kitchen in the dark, not wanting to wake Natalie by turning on lights. As I stood at the sink drinking water, I noticed a thin beam of light coming from the direction of my home office. Probably left the desk lamp on, I thought groggily. But then I heard something, a soft rustling sound, like papers being moved. My first thought was, maybe Natalie couldn't sleep and was looking for a book to read. I walked toward the office, about to call out to her, when I heard her voice, low and urgent. She was on the phone with someone, and what she said made me stop in the doorway. "Yeah, I'm in his office now," she was saying. "The laptop's right here on the desk. Password saved in the browser like you said it would be." My brain struggled to process what I was hearing. Through the crack in the door, I could see her silhouette hunched over my computer, the screen's glow illuminating her face. She looked nothing like the warm, playful woman from earlier. Her expression was cold, focused, all business. "Bank info's all here. Keys are on the kitchen counter where he left them. The Audi's in the garage." She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. "No, he's out cold. I made sure of that." Made sure of that? My mind raced back to the wine, how she'd kept refilling my glass, how unusually drowsy I'd felt before bed. Before I could decide what to do, I heard another sound that made my whole body go rigid, the back door opening. Soft footsteps in the kitchen, deliberate and careful. Someone else was in my house. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it. A man's voice, quiet but clear. "Found the keys. Wallet's here too." I recognized the voice with a jolt of confusion. It was the guy from the yard sale, the one who'd been helping the Thompsons carry boxes. He'd been there the whole time we were talking, probably listening to every word. Through the office door crack, I saw Natalie stand up, my laptop tucked under her arm. "Clean out whatever's in the safe if you can find it," she told him. "I'll get the car started." They were robbing me. This whole day, the connection I thought we'd had, it was all a setup. I crept back to my bedroom as quietly as I could, grabbed my phone from the nightstand, and locked myself in the bathroom. My fingers shook as I dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher about the intruders in my house. She told me to stay where I was, keep the door locked. Officers were on the way. Through the bathroom door, I could hear them moving around, opening drawers, completely comfortable in my space. The casual efficiency of it made me sick. Then I heard my car engine start in the garage, the automatic door rolling up. They were really going to take everything. But just as I thought they were leaving, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. There was sudden commotion, running footsteps. Natalie's voice, sharp with panic, a car door slamming. The engine revved hard, tires squealing as they backed out too fast. The police found me still locked in the bathroom, clutching my phone like a lifeline. They'd fled in my car but had been caught 3 blocks away after running a red light in their panic. My laptop, wallet, and several other items were recovered from the vehicle. The real revelation came when I reviewed my security camera footage with the officers. While Natalie had kept me busy moving furniture and hanging pictures, the man, who police identified as her partner in at least 6 similar crimes, had been casing my house. The cameras showed him testing windows, checking door locks, even making an impression of my spare key hidden under the fake rock by the garden. Every time she'd had me carry something to another room or sent me to adjust something she'd just arranged, he'd been preparing for their late-night return. The whole afternoon of decorating had been choreographed to map out my house and identify where I kept valuables. The officers told me I was lucky I'd woken up when I did. In their other cases, the victims hadn't realized they'd been robbed until morning, giving the pair plenty of time to empty bank accounts and max out credit cards. As I write this, it's been 3 months since that night. I've changed all my locks, upgraded my security system, and learned to trust my gut instead of a pretty smile. But sometimes I still find myself looking at that mirror we hung together and wondering if any part of that day was real. The Saturday morning I drove through Willowbrook felt like any other weekend in early June. I was 32, working as a graphic designer from home, and always on the hunt for vintage materials for my art projects. My apartment was cluttered with old magazines, fabric scraps, and boxes of photographs I'd collected over the years. When I spotted the handwritten yard sale sign taped to a stop sign, I pulled over without thinking twice. The house was a faded yellow ranch-style home with overgrown hedges and a mailbox that read, "The Andersons" in peeling letters. An elderly man sat in a lawn chair near tables covered with dusty items, barely acknowledging me as I approached. I remember him distinctly because of how he watched me browse, not with the eager helpfulness of someone trying to make a sale, but with this strange, heavy silence. He had thin white hair combed over a spotted scalp, wore a plaid shirt despite the heat, and his fingers drummed constantly on the armrest of his chair. When I picked up a cardboard box filled with photo albums and mini DV tapes, marked $5 for all, he finally spoke. "Those belong to my late sister," he said, his voice raspy like he hadn't used it in days. "She was into photography, documenting things." I nodded politely, handed him a $5 bill, and loaded the box into my car. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw him still sitting there, staring after my car until I turned the corner. That afternoon, I spread everything out on my living room floor, excited to see what treasures I'd found. The photo albums were those old magnetic kinds with the clear plastic sheets that stick to the pages, and the mini DV tapes were labeled with dates ranging from 2003 to 2005. I grabbed my old camcorder from the closet, I'd kept it specifically for projects like this, and popped in the first tape. The footage was shaky, clearly handheld, showing a playground on a sunny day. Children ran around, laughing and playing, but the camera focused on just one. A girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with auburn hair and pigtails. She was on the swings, pumping her legs back and forth, completely unaware she was being filmed from what looked like behind a fence. The next tape showed the same girl at what appeared to be a school field day. She wore a bright green t-shirt with a number pinned to it, participating in a sack race. Again, the footage was taken from far away, zoomed in to the point where the image got grainy. Then I opened the first photo album, and my unease deepened. Every single photograph featured this same child, at a grocery store parking lot, walking into a library, eating ice cream on a bench. But here's what made my skin prickle. None of these looked like family photos. There were no birthday parties, no Christmas mornings, no other people posing with her. Just this little girl, captured from a distance, living her life while someone watched and documented every moment. I spent hours going through everything, and the pattern never changed. The girl aged slightly across the timeline. Her hair grew longer, she got taller, lost some baby teeth, but she was always alone in frame, always unaware. Some photos showed her through car windows, others from across streets or playgrounds. The person taking these had been following her, studying her routines. In one album, I found receipts tucked between pages, gas stations, fast food restaurants, all from towns within a 50-mile radius. Whoever this was had been traveling to watch her. My mouth went dry as I picked up what looked like the newest tape, labeled simply October 2005. I almost didn't want to play it, but I had to know. The final tape started with jerky footage from inside a moving car, highway signs blurring past. Then it cut to a rest stop somewhere off the interstate. I could see trucks parked in the background and a small brick building with restrooms. The camera was positioned low, like it was hidden on a dashboard, aimed at the parking area. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then a minivan pulled up, and out stepped the girl, now maybe 9 or 10 years old. She wore a purple jacket and jeans, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. A woman, presumably her mother, headed toward the restrooms while the girl waited by the van, kicking at gravel. That's when everything changed. The girl looked up directly at the camera, and her entire body went rigid. Her eyes widened with pure terror, and she started backing away, calling out something I couldn't make out over the wind noise in the audio. The footage cut to black abruptly, but the audio continued for another 30 seconds. Just the sound of a car door slamming and an engine starting. Then nothing. I sat on my living room floor surrounded by this horrifying collection, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. This wasn't some innocent hobby or art project. Someone had stalked this child for years, and that final tape, the way she'd looked at the camera, the naked fear on her face. I grabbed my laptop and started searching, typing in combinations of missing girl, 2005, rest stop, and nearby town names I'd seen on the receipts. It took less than 20 minutes to find her. Her name was Ashley Carpenter, and she'd vanished from a rest stop off Interstate 75 on October 14, 2005. The news articles included her school photo. That same auburn hair, those same bright eyes I'd been staring at for hours. She'd been traveling with her mother from Cincinnati to visit family in Louisville when she disappeared during a bathroom break. Her mother had been in the restroom for less than 5 minutes, but when she came out, Ashley was gone. No witnesses, no evidence, just a 9-year-old girl who vanished into thin air. The case had gone cold after a year of searching. I stared at her photo on my screen, then back at the album spread across my floor, and felt bile rise in my throat. I knew exactly who had taken her. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through more articles, looking for any mention of suspects. Then I found it, a small follow-up piece from 2006. Police had questioned several individuals, including a woman named Dorothy Anderson who lived in Willowbrook and worked as a substitute teacher at Ashley's school. She'd been cleared due to lack of evidence, but the article noted she'd left her teaching position shortly after Ashley's disappearance. Dorothy Anderson. The man at the yard sale had said the items belonged to his late sister. I thought about his nervous fingers drumming on the chair, the way he'd watched me drive away. Had he known what was in that box? Of course he had. Why else would someone keep such a collection hidden away for nearly 20 years? I called the police immediately, but the dispatcher who answered sounded skeptical when I tried to explain. She took down my information and said a detective would contact me, but I could tell she thought I was just another true crime enthusiast with an overactive imagination. After hanging up, I carefully placed each tape and album into plastic bags, trying not to smudge any fingerprints that might remain. Then I noticed something I'd missed before, a small notebook tucked into the back of the last album. Inside, written in neat cursive, were detailed notes about Ashley's routines. Mondays, Girl Scouts at Community Center, 3:35 LR. Mother waits in parking lot, usually reads. Wednesdays, library after school, checks out 2-3 books, favors fantasy series. The entries went on for pages, a meticulous record of a child's life recorded by someone planning something terrible. By midnight, I couldn't wait any longer. I drove back to Willowbrook, my car loaded with all the evidence in a cardboard box. The yellow house was dark except for a single porch light, and the yard sale tables were gone. I parked across the street and called 911, insisting they send officers immediately, that I had evidence in a kidnapping case. While I waited, I searched for more information about Dorothy Anderson on my phone. I found an obituary from 3 months ago. She died of a stroke at age 67, but her brother, Robert Anderson, was very much alive, and according to property records, he'd lived at this address for 40 years. 2 police cruisers arrived within 15 minutes and I showed them everything. Their casual demeanor changed completely when they saw Ashley's terrified face in that final video. The rest happened quickly. They got a warrant that night and searched the Anderson house while I waited at the station to give my statement. Around 4 a.m., a detective came to tell me what they'd found. In the basement, behind a false wall, they discovered more tapes, more photos, and journals dating back decades. Not just of Ashley, but of other children too. Dorothy Anderson had been documenting her obsessions for years, and her brother had helped cover it up. They found evidence linking her to Ashley's disappearance and 2 other cold cases. As for Ashley herself, they're still investigating leads from the journals, hoping one might reveal where Dorothy took her that October day. The detective thanked me for bringing this forward, said I might have helped solve cases that had haunted families for years. I drove home as the sun came up, exhausted but unable to stop thinking about that little girl with auburn hair, and how a $5 yard sale purchase had finally given her family some answers. The weekend after Labor Day 2022 was when I decided to finally clean out my garage and have that yard sale I'd been putting off for years. I'd just gotten divorced from Michael 6 months earlier, and the house on Sycamore Drive felt too big, too empty, too full of memories I needed to purge. Living alone for the first time in 15 years was still an adjustment, but I was determined to make this place feel like mine. Setting up tables in my driveway that Saturday morning, arranging old kitchen gadgets and Michael's abandoned golf clubs, I actually felt optimistic. The weather was perfect, neighbors were out walking their dogs, and I'd already made $20 from Mrs. Dalton, who bought 3 of my old flower vases. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even, until this guy showed up around 11. He wasn't from the neighborhood, that much was obvious. Most people who stopped by were locals or families driving through looking for deals, but this man came alone, on foot, wearing a faded gray jacket despite the warm weather. What struck me first were his eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, and they never seemed to blink. He was probably in his 40s, average height, with thinning brown hair that looked like he'd cut it himself, He didn't browse like other customers, didn't pick things up or check prices. Instead, he stood at the edge of my driveway, just watching me interact with other shoppers. When I finally approached him to ask if he needed help finding anything, he smiled. Not a friendly smile, but something that made all the hair on my arms stand up. "Just looking," he said. But his eyes weren't on the merchandise. They were scanning my house, lingering on the windows, the side gate, the path to my backyard. After about 10 minutes of him just standing there, he finally walked over to my table of books. He picked up an old cookbook, flipped through it without really looking at the pages, then set it down. "You live here alone?" he asked, so casually it took me a second to process the question. I gave him a vague answer about being busy with work, trying to deflect, but he pressed on. "Must be a big house for one person. How many bedrooms? 3? 4? His questions came rapid fire. Did I work from home? What time did I usually get back from work? Did I have a dog? An alarm system? Each question felt like he was building a mental blueprint of my life, my routines, my vulnerabilities. I tried to stay polite but brief, busying myself with rearranging items on the tables, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. But he didn't leave. He lingered for another hour, occasionally picking up random objects, a lamp, an old radio, a picture frame, and asking bizarre, specific questions about each one. "This lamp, was it in your bedroom? Does it still work? Do you use it at night?" When he held up the picture frame, which still had a photo of Michael and me from our anniversary trip to Napa, he studied it intently. "Recent photo. Doesn't look like him anymore, does it?" I hadn't mentioned anything about Michael or our divorce. The way he said it, like he already knew Michael wasn't around anymore, made my chest tighten. I mumbled something about needing to help another customer and walked away, but I could feel those pale eyes following me. By the time I turned back around, he was examining the side of my house, actually peering into my living room window. His hands cupped around his face to see through the glass. "Excuse me, that's private property," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned slowly, that unsettling smile still plastered on his face. "Just admiring your home. Those locks look pretty old. Original to the house?" Before I could respond, he walked back to the tables and picked up a small jewelry box I was selling. $20 seems steep for this," he said, opening and closing the lid repeatedly. "I'll give you 5. When I politely declined, he set it down hard enough to make the table shake. "You should be more flexible. It's not safe to be too rigid in life, or in business." The way he emphasized safe made my mouth go dry. He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and placed it on the table. "For your time," he said, then walked away without taking anything, heading down the street but turning back twice to look at my house. The rest of the yard sale passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on customers or prices. I kept watching the street, expecting to see that gray jacket reappear. Around 3 o'clock, I decided to pack up early. My neighbor, Carl, helped me carry the tables back into the garage. "You okay, Brenda? You seem jumpy," he asked. I almost told him about the strange man, but decided against it. What would I say? That someone asked too many questions and gave me the creeps. As Carl left, I noticed something that made my heart race. Muddy footprints along the side of my house, leading right up to my living room window. They were fresh, the shoe pattern clear in the dirt. But what really got me was that the prints continued around to the back of the house, stopping at my kitchen window and back door. I followed them, my legs feeling like jelly, and found something else. Finger smudges on the kitchen window glass, as if someone had been trying to see inside or test if it was locked. I spent the rest of the afternoon checking every lock twice, closing all the blinds and trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just a weird guy, socially awkward, nothing more. But as evening approached, I couldn't shake the image of those pale eyes studying my house like he was memorizing every detail. I made dinner, but barely touched it, jumping at every little sound. The ice maker, a car door slamming, the oak tree branches scraping against the roof. Around 9:30, I was in the living room trying to distract myself with a movie when I heard it. a soft scratching sound coming from the back of the house. At first, I thought it was just the neighbor's cat. Whiskers often came by looking for treats. But then I heard the distinct sound of the doorknob turning, slowly, deliberately. Testing. My whole body went rigid. The doorknob jiggled again, more forcefully this time. Then nothing. Silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. I crept toward the kitchen, staying low, my phone clutched in my hand with 911 already dialed but not yet called. Through a gap in the blinds, I could make out a shadowy figure at my back door. Even in the darkness, I recognized the shape. Same height, same slouched posture, same gray jacket. He wasn't trying to force his way in. He was methodical, patient, running his hands along the door frame like he was feeling for weaknesses. When he moved to the kitchen window, his face came into view under the porch light. Those pale eyes were looking directly at where I was hiding, as if he could see right through the blinds. He pressed his face against the glass, leaving fog marks with his breath, and mouthed something I couldn't make out. Then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, he stepped back into the shadows and was gone. I hit call on 911 immediately, my voice shaking as I told the dispatcher about the attempted break-in. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. Officer Nguyen and Officer Brooks were thorough, taking my statement about the yard sale encounter and examining the area around my back door with flashlights. They found fresh shoe prints in the flower bed, the same tread pattern I'd noticed earlier, and more smudges on both the kitchen window and door handle. "These prints are definitely recent," Officer Nguyen said, taking photos. "The soil's still damp from this morning's sprinklers." They also discovered something I'd missed: scratch marks around the lock on my back door, subtle but deliberate, like someone had been trying to pick it. Officer Brooks suggested I consider upgrading my locks and maybe installing security cameras. They promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood and gave me a case number, but we all knew there wasn't much they could do without more evidence or identification of the man. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow outside looked like him. Every noise sounded like footsteps. I moved a chair in front of the back door and dragged my bedroom dresser in front of my bedroom door, creating a makeshift barricade. Sunday passed without incident, but I couldn't relax. I called a locksmith first thing Monday morning and had all my locks changed to high-security deadbolts. The locksmith, an older man named Frank, whistled low when he saw the scratch marks. "Someone was definitely trying to get in here," he confirmed. "Good thing you called when you did." I also ordered security cameras online, paying extra for expedited shipping. For the next few days, I established a new routine: checking all windows and doors before dark, keeping lights on in every room, and sleeping with my phone and a baseball bat beside my bed. I told myself I was being paranoid, that he'd probably moved on, but something in my gut said this wasn't over. A week later, on a Thursday morning, Carl knocked on my door with his tablet in hand, his face pale. "Brenda, you need to see this," he said, pulling up his Ring camera footage from the night before. The timestamp showed 12:47 a.m. In the grainy black and white video, a figure in a gray jacket was methodically trying door handles along our street. He'd start with the front door, jiggle it, then move to check windows, even attempting to lift garage doors. The way he moved was unmistakable. That same patient, calculating approach I'd witnessed at my back door. Carl fast-forwarded to another clip from 1:23 a.m. The man was at the Jeffersons' house 3 doors down, actually managing to open their gate before their motion lights scared him off. But what made my blood chill was the final clip. At 1:45 a.m., he was back at my house, standing at the edge of my property, just staring. He stood there for 12 minutes, perfectly still, before walking away. Carl had already shared the footage with the police and our neighborhood watch group. The police took it seriously this time. Detective Walsh came by that afternoon to review all the footage and take additional statements. She told me they'd identified similar patterns in 2 other neighborhoods. A man matching the same description had been spotted at yard sales, asking invasive questions, then showing up later to test doors and windows. "He's escalating," she said grimly. But now we have clear footage and multiple witnesses. They increased patrols and distributed his image from the ring footage to all units. Within 3 days, they arrested him trying to break into a house 2 miles away. His name was Dennis Horvath, and he had a history of burglary and stalking charges in 3 different states. In his car, they found notebooks filled with addresses, sketches of house layouts, and detailed notes about residents' routines. My address was there, along with notes about my divorce, my work schedule, and even what time I typically went to bed. He'd been watching me for weeks before the yard sale, they said. The yard sale just gave him an excuse to get close, to fill in the gaps in his surveillance. He's serving 5 years now, and I still have those security cameras. I still check them every night, and I haven't had another yard sale since. The box from the yard sale. Last Saturday started like any other weekend morning in our neighborhood. I was living in a modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs, working as an accountant for a local firm, and generally keeping to myself. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, and I was still adjusting to the empty spaces where furniture used to be. That's actually why I decided to check out the yard sale down the street. Figured I might find a cheap bookshelf, or maybe a desk lamp. The house belonged to the Waverleys, an older couple who'd lived there since before I moved to the neighborhood 5 years ago. Mrs. Waverley had passed away recently, and her husband was moving to an assisted living facility, so they were selling off decades of accumulated belongings. The wooden box caught my eye immediately, sitting between a stack of yellowed National Geographic magazines and a tarnished brass telescope. It was about the size of a shoebox but heavier, made from dark walnut with brass corner reinforcements that had developed a green patina over the years. The lid had an intricate carving of an eagle clutching arrows and olive branches, and when I lifted it, the hinges creaked like they hadn't been opened in years. Inside were military medals, faded photographs of soldiers, handwritten letters tied with twine, and what looked like a leather-bound journal. The whole collection seemed untouched by time, preserved in that musty sweet way that old paper gets. When I asked the woman running the sale, Mrs. Waverley's daughter, I think, about the price, she barely glanced at it before saying $15. Said it was just old war stuff from the attic, nothing special. I brought the box home around noon and set it on my kitchen table, making myself a sandwich before diving into its contents. The photographs were fascinating. Young men in uniform standing in front of bombers, group shots on tropical islands, candid moments of soldiers playing cards or writing letters. One photo in particular stood out, a stern-looking sergeant with piercing eyes standing alone against a brick wall. His expression so intense it made me uncomfortable to look at for too long. The letters were mostly correspondence between someone named Private First Class Eugene Kessler and his sweetheart back home, filled with the kind of innocent romance you'd expect from that era. But there were other letters too, written in German, with official-looking stamps and seals. The journal was the real treasure, though, page after page of detailed entries about missions, fellow soldiers, and something repeatedly referred to as the burden we carry. Around 3 that afternoon, I was deep into reading the journal when someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding, like they were trying to break it down. Through the peephole, I saw an elderly man, probably in his 80s, wearing a rumpled gray suit that looked like he'd slept in it. His face was flushed red, and he was breathing hard, one gnarled fist raised to strike the door again. When I opened it with the chain still attached, he immediately started shouting about his father's things and demanding I return what I'd stolen. His eyes had the same intensity as the sergeant in that photograph, and I realized with a chill that they might be the same person, father and son. He said his name was Leonard Kessler, Eugene's son, and that box contained things that should never have been sold, things that belonged to his family alone. I tried to be reasonable, explaining that I'd bought the box fair and square at a public yard sale, but Leonard wasn't having it. He kept ranting about how the Waverleys had no right to sell his father's belongings. how he'd only left them there temporarily during a house fire years ago, and Mrs. Waverly had promised to keep them safe. His story didn't quite add up. Why leave something so important with neighbors for years? But the desperation in his voice was real. He offered to buy it back, pulling out a wad of crumpled bills from his pocket. But when I hesitated, something changed in his demeanor. His shoulders sagged, and he looked at me with an expression that was equal parts sorrow and menace. "You don't understand what you've brought into your home," he said quietly. "Those letters, that journal, they're not just memories. They're confessions, witnesses. My father did things in the war, necessary things, and he spent the rest of his life making sure they stayed buried. Now you've disturbed them." That night I couldn't stop thinking about Leonard's visit. I'd refused to sell him the box, partly out of stubbornness and partly because his behavior had genuinely unsettled me. Around 11, I was getting ready for bed when I heard something on my front porch. Through the window, I could see a small bundle wrapped in brown paper sitting on my doormat. No car in sight, no movement in the shadows. I waited a full 10 minutes before opening the door, and even then, I used a broom handle to pull the package inside. When I unwrapped it, my throat went dry. Inside was a collection of teeth, human teeth, yellowed with age and strung together on a piece of wire like some grotesque necklace. Underneath was a note in shaky handwriting. "From the enemies of Eugene Kessler, return what you stole or join them." I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. The next morning, Sunday, I found more items scattered across my porch. A rusted military knife with dark stains on the blade, a handful of brass shell casings, and photographs I hadn't seen in the box. Images of mass graves, of soldiers standing over bodies, of Eugene Kessler himself holding what looked like gold fillings in his palm. These weren't the heroic war photos you see in museums. These were evidence of something much darker. I called the police, but what could I tell them? An old man was leaving weird stuff on my porch? They took a report and said they'd increase patrols, but I could tell they thought I was overreacting. That evening, as dusk fell, I installed a security camera I'd bought at the hardware store, pointing it directly at my front door. Monday night brought the worst delivery yet. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a scratching sound at my bedroom window. When I pulled back the curtain, Leonard Kessler's face was inches from the glass, his mouth moving wordlessly, his breath fogging up the pane. In his hands, he held up a piece of paper with an address written on it. My sister's address in Oregon. The message was clear. This wasn't just about me anymore. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but by the time I looked back, he was gone. On the windowsill outside, he'd left a small leather pouch. Inside were more teeth, but these were smaller, children's teeth, along with a faded photograph of a young boy who looked disturbingly like Leonard himself. On the back, someone had written in German, and though I couldn't translate it perfectly, I recognized the word Vergeltung, retribution. That's when I decided I'd had enough. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove straight to the Waverly house. The daughter was there, packing up the last of the items, and when I explained what had been happening, her face went pale. She told me Leonard had been coming around for weeks before the sale, claiming the Waverlys had stolen from him, making wild accusations about her mother hiding blood money from the war. She'd thought he was just a confused old man with dementia. But then she remembered something. Her mother had mentioned once that Eugene Kessler had been their neighbor in the 1950s, and that he'd left town suddenly after some kind of scandal involving missing donations from the church reconstruction fund. The box might have been left behind in the chaos of his departure, forgotten in the Waverly's attic for decades. I spent that entire day reading through every document in the box more carefully, and the picture that emerged was horrifying. Eugene Kessler hadn't just been a soldier. He'd been part of a unit that systematically looted valuables from the dead, both enemy and civilian. The German letters were from families demanding the return of stolen heirlooms. The journal entries spoke in code about securing assets and permanent silence. The children's teeth were trophies, But the most damning evidence was a list of names and addresses, all crossed out except for 3, with amounts of money next to each one. The Waverleys' name was on that list, uncrossed. Leonard wasn't just trying to retrieve family history. He was trying to cover up his father's crimes and possibly continue his work. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a motel 2 towns over and made a decision. The next morning, I drove to the FBI field office in the state capital. It took 3 hours of explaining before they took me seriously, but once I showed them the documents, especially the list with amounts and addresses, things moved quickly. The agent assigned to my case, a young woman named Agent Reeves, said they'd been tracking similar cases of stolen war artifacts being used for blackmail across 3 states. Leonard Kessler, it turned out, had been living off his father's blood money for decades, using the threat of exposure to extort families whose names appeared in his father's records. The teeth, the photographs, the late-night visits. It was all part of a campaign of intimidation he'd perfected over the years. When victims paid, their names got crossed off the list. When they didn't, like the Waverleys apparently hadn't, things escalated. Agent Reeves arranged for local police to pick up Leonard that afternoon at his apartment, where they found boxes of similar trophies and evidence linking him to at least a dozen extortion cases. I never went back to that house. The FBI kept the box as evidence, and I gladly let them have it. Leonard was charged with extortion, criminal harassment, and interstate fraud. Turns out, crossing state lines to threaten my sister was the mistake that gave them federal jurisdiction. He died in custody 6 months later while awaiting trial, taking whatever other secrets he had to the grave. I eventually learned from Agent Reeves that Eugene Kessler unit had been investigated after the war but never prosecuted, protected by a combination of destroyed records and mutual silence. The stolen items had been their retirement fund, distributed among the survivors with the understanding that they'd never speak of what they'd done. Leonard had inherited not just the physical evidence but the whole sick system of keeping those secrets buried, through fear. I moved to a different city after that, started fresh. Sometimes I wonder about the 3 uncrossed names on that list and whether they ever found peace. But mostly, I try not to think about it at all. Some boxes should stay closed. It was a neighborhood tradition, one of those things that kept our small community feeling connected. Every summer, we organized a joint yard sale, each house setting up their own table or tarp out front, with people walking up and down the block like it was a little festival. That year, I had more time than usual to prepare. I'd recently gone part-time at work and decided it was a good excuse to declutter. My garage was overflowing with boxes from when I moved in, and this felt like the perfect opportunity to finally go through them. I'd spent most of Friday pulling everything out, pricing things, and chatting with my neighbor Ethel, who was in her 80s and always insisted on participating, even if it was just to sit by her lawn with lemonade. Flyers had gone out saying the event started at 8 a.m. on Saturday, but I'd learned the hard way in previous years that there were always early birds. This time, I wasn't opening a second before 8, no matter how much someone knocked. Around 5:45 a.m., while I was still in my robe and slippers and hadn't even put the tables out, someone rang my doorbell. Not once, 3 times in a row, loud and impatient, like someone who thinks they're doing you a favor. When I peeked through the side window, I saw a white cargo van parked halfway up my driveway. The man standing outside was tall, maybe late 40s, with a buzzed haircut and one of those neon yellow vests that road workers wear. It was still dark out, and something about the way he stood there, not looking around or fidgeting, just staring straight at my door, set me on edge. I opened the door just a crack, enough to keep the chain lock in place. He said he'd seen the signs and wanted to get a head start before the crowds. I told him politely that we weren't open yet, and that he'd have to come back later like everyone else. His tone shifted instantly. "You got anything good or not?" he asked, more like a demand than a question. When I didn't answer right away, he leaned closer. "Don't waste my time." I was so taken aback that I just told him again, firmly, that we'd be open at 8 and started closing the door. Before it latched, he muttered something low, too quiet for me to catch, but it wasn't friendly. I stood there for a minute, waiting to hear if he was walking away, but there was only silence. When I finally looked again, the van was gone. By noon that day, the sale was in full swing, and I had mostly put that interaction behind me. I didn't mention it to anyone, not even Ethel, who'd been set up just across the street, because I figured he was just one of those pushy types. But that night, around 11 p.m., I saw flashing blue lights through my living room window. I stepped outside and saw 2 patrol cars parked in front of Ethel's house. Her son, Kevin, who often came by to help her with yard work, was speaking with an officer near the garage. I walked over, concerned, and learned that someone had broken in. They didn't take random junk either. They went straight for the big stuff. Power tools, a generator, even a vintage drill press that had belonged to her late husband. Kevin looked shaken. He said the side door was pried open, and the motion light above the garage had been smashed. I barely slept that night. Every time a car passed, I got up to look out the window. It wasn't like our neighborhood was crime-free, but this was personal. Whoever did it had walked right past my place, or worse, had stopped to watch. The next morning, I talked with a few neighbors while we were cleaning up our setups. Turns out Ethel wasn't the only one. 2 houses down, Mr. Langley's shed had been forced open too, but he hadn't even realized it until that morning. His chainsaw and a set of metal toolboxes were gone. Then Carla, who lives at the end of the street, mentioned that her camera had caught a white van driving slowly down the block around 4:20 a.m. It didn't stop, didn't speed. It just crawled past like the driver was studying every driveway. That's when I remembered the man from earlier. I hadn't thought to report it before, but now it felt more than relevant. I called the non-emergency line and gave a description. The van, the guy's build, the vest, the way he rang my doorbell before dawn. The officer I spoke to didn't say much, just thanked me and added it to the report. But something about his tone made me think I wasn't the first to bring up a white cargo van. Later that day, Kevin mentioned that tire tracks had been found near the edge of Ethel's backyard, where there's no pavement, just grass and gravel. Same kind of marks were found behind Mr. Langley's and even in front of Carla's mailbox. It wasn't a random hit. It felt like someone was targeting us, watching. People started getting nervous. Someone put up flyers with a sketch of the van and a reminder to keep lights on at night. A few folks installed security cameras within a day or two, even if they couldn't afford it. I started double-checking every lock before bed, even on the windows I'd never touched before. The weirdest part was how stories kept surfacing. A woman on the next block said a guy in a similar van had approached her the week before, pretending to look for a lost dog. Another neighbor said he caught someone trying to open his side gate in the early hours, but when he shouted from the window, the person ran off and jumped into a white van that sped away without headlights. By midweek, we were all on edge. It wasn't just the break-ins, it was the feeling that we were being scoped out, maybe even marked. Someone mentioned seeing orange dots spray-painted on the curb by certain driveways. I checked mine and found a small faded one, almost invisible unless you knew to look. Ethel had one too, right near the edge of her lawn. At first I thought maybe they were from the city or some kind of utility marking, but no one remembered them being there before. And just like that, the yard sale, something meant to bring the neighborhood together, had turned into the thing that made us all start looking over our shoulders. That Friday night, just before midnight, I heard something again. Not loud, just this short metallic clink, like something brushing against the side gate. I didn't turn on the porch light. Instead, I stayed by the front window, lights off, watching. A minute later, a white van rolled by, moving slow. Slower than normal traffic. There was no logo, no license plate on the front, just a dented bumper and one of those little air fresheners dangling from the mirror. I tried to grab my phone in time to take a picture, but it had already turned the corner. I called the police right away, and to their credit, they showed up within 10 minutes. But by then, of course, the van was long gone. After that, something shifted. I don't know if the patrol car that started looping through the neighborhood every few hours scared the guy off, or if he had simply gotten what he came for and moved on. But the sighting stopped. No more early morning doorbells, no more tire tracks, no more slow-driving vans. Still, most of us kept our security lights up. A few neighbors even got together and installed motion sensor floodlights along the back alley behind our homes. The police never officially said anything, but someone claimed the same kind of thefts were happening in neighborhoods 2 towns over. I've thought a lot about that morning, the way he stared at the door without blinking, how easily his mood shifted, and how prepared he seemed, like this wasn't his first time doing something like that. The vest, the van, the way he used a common community event to blend in. He didn't need to force his way in that morning. He just needed to see which houses had what, who had tools, who lived alone, who had their garage open. I keep wondering how many other places he drove past before deciding on Ethel's. Or maybe it wasn't random at all. Either way, I don't participate in the yard sale anymore. I told the others I just didn't have anything to sell. But the truth is, I can't shake the feeling that we were part of someone's checklist. I still have the flyer with the van sketch folded in a kitchen drawer, just in case. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, not because I expect to see that van again, but to remind myself how quickly something familiar can turn into a warning sign. It was supposed to be a morning of folding tables, secondhand books, and polite haggling. Instead, it's the reason I keep a crowbar under my bed.